Hello and welcome. I'm very happy you are here today. This video is made especially for people who want to improve their English skills while enjoying a meaningful story. Whether you are a beginner or an intermediate learner, this story will help you practice reading, listening, and understanding natural English in a simple and friendly way. In today's video, you will hear a heartfelt story called The Price of Laziness. It takes place in the quiet countryside and follows the journey of a young man who learns important lessons about responsibility, effort, and personal growth. At first, he avoids work and ignores the needs of his home and family. But through challenges, mistakes, and wise guidance, he discovers the true value of hard work and the beauty of changing one's life. As you listen and read along, you will learn new vocabulary, understand sentence structure better, and hear how English sounds in real, natural storytelling. This makes it easier for you to improve your speaking and listening skills. You can pause the video anytime to repeat a sentence, practice pronunciation, or check the meaning of a word you don't know. You can also listen again to hear how the rhythm and flow of English works in storytelling. Stories are one of the best ways to learn a language. They help you connect emotion with meaning, and they make learning enjoyable and memorable. This story will not only help you practice English, but it will also inspire you with important life lessons about discipline, responsibility, and personal change. This video is perfect for anyone who wants to build confidence in English while gaining motivation in life. So, sit comfortably, relax your mind, and open your heart to the message of this story. Remember, learning English is a journey, and every small step you take brings you closer to improvement. Let's begin this experience together. Thank you for choosing to spend your time learning and growing with me today. I hope you find this story both helpful and inspiring. Chapter 1. The Quiet Countryside. The countryside woke earlier than anyone. Long before the sun climbed over the distant hills, a soft mist spread across the fields like a quiet blanket. The golden crops shimmered beneath the first touch of morning light, and cattle grazed lazily along the open meadows, their gentle movements adding calm to the waking land. Birds called out from the treetops, greeting a new day with songs that drifted through the fresh air. Everything in this place seemed to breathe slowly and peacefully, as if reminding the world that life didn't need to rush to be beautiful. On the edge of this quiet landscape stood a small wooden house, simple, old, and held together mostly by memories and love. Inside the house lived a young man with his aging mother. The house wasn't much, but it had sheltered their lives through many seasons. Harsh summers, long rains, and years of gentle, silent struggle. The mother kept the home clean and warm as best as she could, despite the pain in her joints and the growing slowness of age. She had once dreamed her child would help carry the weight of their days. But dreams, she knew, could be delicate things. The young man, who should have been full of energy and purpose, had fallen into a habit that weighed heavier than work ever could: laziness. While the rest of the countryside rose with the sun, he preferred to sleep late, curled beneath a blanket, ignoring the sounds of morning calling him to responsibility. When he did rise, it was with no plan, no urgency, and no sense of duty. He wandered aimlessly through the village paths, or sat by the riverbank, letting time pass without thought for what needed to be done at home. The fence around their house needed repair. The small vegetable patch needed watering. Firewood was running low. But he always found small excuses, small delays, small promises like, "I'll do it later," or "maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow became next week, and next week quietly became never. The countryside, with its slow rhythms, allowed room for rest, but not for neglect. Yet the young man didn't see the difference. He believed life would always be patient with him. His mother watched all this with a heart that was both heavy and hopeful. She didn't scold him much. Instead, she sighed softly when he turned away from chores and smiled gently when he walked past without noticing her tired hands. Her eyes held a quiet worry that she tried to hide. She feared he was drifting too far into a kind of life that would only bring him hardship later. Still, she hoped that one day he would open his eyes and understand what she had always known: that a person's future is shaped by the effort they put into today. Sometimes, in the early mornings when she rose before him, she stood outside and looked at the fields. She watched the farmers guiding their cattle, the women sweeping their yards, the young children feeding animals. Everyone, it seemed, knew their place in the rhythm of rural life. Work was not just work here. It was survival, dignity, and pride. She wished her child would see that. She wished he would understand that laziness may feel comfortable now, but its price would come eventually. The countryside itself seemed to whisper a lesson with every sunrise and every turning season. In the countryside, life rewards effort, but punishes laziness. It was a truth carved into the soil, a truth every farmer and villager lived by. The young man had yet to learn it, but the land, patient yet firm, was waiting, and life, as it always does, was preparing to teach him in its own quiet way. Chapter 2: A Habit of Avoidance. As the days passed, the young man's habits became more visible to the people around him. In the countryside, everyone's life intertwined with the next. Neighbors shared tools, traded crops, and lent hands during busy seasons. Harvest time especially brought the entire community together. Men cut the tall stalks, women tied bundles, and even children gathered grains that fell on the ground. Everyone did something. Everyone except the young man. While others worked under the warm sun, he stayed at home or wandered off to the shade of a large banyan tree near the riverbank. When someone called out to him for help, he pretended not to hear or replied with a lazy wave of his hand. Sometimes he said he was tired. Other times he simply shrugged as if the work was beneath him. The community noticed, and though they did not confront him directly, their disappointment hung silently in the air. Around his own home, signs of neglect grew clearer. The old fence, once firm and sturdy, leaned dangerously after storms and gusty winds. Threads of rope tied it together, but only barely. A gate that should have been repaired weeks ago remained crooked. Grass and weeds slowly swallowed the path to the field, and the small patch of land that could have easily produced vegetables or grains lay untouched season after season. Each day the sun rose and set, and each day the young man found another excuse to do nothing. His mother watched quietly, her heart tightening a little more each time she saw something undone. She tried to nudge him gently, hoping soft words would guide him. "The fence won't fix itself," she'd say in the early mornings, placing a plate of food before him. Or, "It will rain soon. Perhaps you should clear the field today." But he always brushed her words aside. Sometimes he mumbled, later, or I'll get to it tomorrow, without meaning either. Other times, he simply walked away as if her concerns were too light to matter. Though she rarely raised her voice, the mother's sadness deepened. She knew that life in the countryside required effort, not for luxury, but for survival. Neglected land meant empty storage. A broken fence meant wandering animals. Unpreparedness meant suffering when hard times came. She hoped he would understand before life taught him the hard way. The villagers began to talk among themselves. In small gatherings near wells, in the corners of tea stalls, or outside their homes during evening conversations, whispers emerged about the idle boy. No one said his name, because he had never really given them a reason to. He had become known more for what he avoided than for who he was. Some shook their heads in pity, believing he would grow out of it someday. Others sighed with frustration, wishing he would contribute like everyone else. Yet all agreed that laziness was a dangerous companion, one that led people down difficult roads. Sometimes the whispers reached him, carried by children or by accident, but he never took them seriously. Instead, he laughed it off, telling himself that people talked too much. He believed their words didn't matter, that life would continue smoothly whether he worked hard or not. To him, trouble seemed far away, almost imaginary. Why worry about fences and fields when the sun still rose beautifully every morning? Why wake up early to work when the world looked calm and forgiving? He convinced himself that comfort was more important than effort. Hard work, he thought, belonged to those who wanted stress. Resting under the shade, spending long hours doing nothing, or walking aimlessly through the village felt easier, more pleasant. He ignored the small voice inside him that whispered he could do more, be more, if only he tried. He silenced that voice with lazy thoughts and empty promises. Yet beneath his carefree attitude, something quiet and invisible was happening. Every undone task added weight to the future. Every avoided responsibility planted a seed that would eventually grow into something harder to face. His mother knew it. The villagers sensed it. Even the land itself seemed to sense it, for the countryside had always been a place where effort shaped destiny. But the young man remained blind to it all, choosing the path of least resistance day after day. He believed nothing would ever change, that life would always be patient. What he didn't realize was that patience runs out, not suddenly, but slowly, like water slipping through a crack. And sooner or later, the consequences of his laziness would come looking for him. Chapter 3. The Missed Opportunities. Opportunities in the countryside did not come often, but when they did, they came quietly, like gentle knocks on a door. And just like doors, they needed to be opened at the right moment. For the young man, however, every knock went unanswered. One morning, a traveling merchant passed through the village with his cart full of tools, cloth, and supplies. The man was cheerful and talkative, stopping by each home to ask if anyone needed work or wanted to earn a little money helping him load and unload goods. When he reached the small wooden house by the field, he saw the young man sitting outside, staring lazily at the sky. "You look strong," the merchant said kindly. "I could use some help today. I'll pay you fairly. Just a few hours will do." The offer was genuine, a chance for the young man to learn responsibility and earn something of his own. But he only shrugged and said, Maybe later. I'm tired today." The merchant smiled politely, but the disappointment in his eyes was hard to miss. "Opportunities don't wait forever," he said before walking off to find help elsewhere. The young man simply leaned back in his chair, believing there would always be a next time. Days later, a local craftsman, known in the village for his skill with wood and tools, decided to take on an apprentice. Many young people hoped for the chance, because working under him meant learning a valuable trade. The craftsman visited houses to see who might be interested. When he came to the young man's home, the mother insisted her son would be perfect for the role. "He just needs guidance," she said softly. "He is capable if someone teaches him." The craftsman nodded and agreed to meet the young man at sunrise the next day. But sunrise came and went. The sky brightened, the birds sang, and the village stirred awake. Yet the young man slept soundly, untouched by the responsibilities waiting outside his window. By the time he finally woke, the sun was high and the opportunity was gone. The craftsman had chosen someone else. When the mother told her son what had happened, he simply stretched his arms and said, "It doesn't matter. I wasn't interested anyway." But deep inside, a small part of him wondered why he always felt so unprepared for the future. As the weeks passed, his mother's health began to weaken. She worked tirelessly despite her age, doing chores he neglected, fetching water, tending the remaining crops, managing the house. Each day her steps grew slower, her breath heavier. She tried to hide the pain, but the young man noticed anyway. Yet every time he told himself he would help, he found an excuse to delay. "I'll do it tomorrow," he repeated, the same empty promise over and over. Neighbors who once offered their support began to feel frustrated. They had carried burdens he should have helped with, repairing his broken tools, sharing food during difficult weeks, lending a hand to his mother when he refused. Their patience wore thin. Slowly, they stopped visiting. They stopped asking him to join community tasks. When harvest season came, no one called him. The village had learned not to rely on someone who never showed up. One afternoon, the young man faced the consequences of his laziness in a way he had never experienced before. During a community gathering, villagers were sorting crops and preparing them for storage. The young man had finally decided to show his face, perhaps to prove he wasn't completely idle. Someone handed him a simple task: just carry a few baskets and stack them neatly. It should have been easy, but he was careless, unprepared, and inattentive. While lifting a heavy basket, he lost his grip and dropped it. The crops scattered across the ground in front of everyone. A hush fell over the crowd as people stared, their expressions a mix of disappointment and annoyance. The work had to be done all over again, and time was wasted because of him. For the first time, embarrassment burned through his chest. His cheeks warmed, and his eyes dropped to the ground. He heard whispers, soft but sharp enough to cut. "This is why we don't ask him to help. He never takes anything seriously. Always trouble." He wanted to defend himself, to say it was just an accident. But even he knew the truth. His laziness had caused this. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his shoulders, deeper than any shame he had ever felt. For the first time, he wondered if people saw him exactly as he feared, as someone who wasted his life. That day, As he walked home with his head low, the young man felt a quiet ache inside him, a seed of doubt, a spark of realization, a whisper from life saying, "This is the beginning of the price you will pay." Chapter 4. A Lesson from the Farmer. The young man's embarrassment after the public mistake lingered in the air for days. Though he tried to brush it off, it followed him like a shadow. People were polite, but distant. His mother worried silently, watching him sit for hours, lost in thought. But change never begins with thinking alone. It needs a nudge, a push, or, in his case, an unexpected teacher. One morning, just after dawn, someone knocked at the door. The young man opened it slowly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Standing outside was the wise old farmer who lived farther down the road. He was known for his strong work ethic, calm nature, and fields that always produced the best harvest. His face held deep lines, each one shaped by years of labor under the sun. "I'm headed to the fields," the farmer said calmly. "Come with me." The young man blinked in surprise. "Why me?" The farmer gave a small, knowing smile. "Because you need to learn what the ground already knows." The young man wanted to refuse. Waking early, working in the fields, sweating under the sun. None of that appealed to him. But something inside him softened, perhaps the lingering shame, or perhaps the farmer's steady voice. Reluctantly, he nodded and followed. The walk was long and quiet. The sky was painted with soft pinks and oranges as the sun slowly rose, spreading warmth across the fields. The young man noticed how peaceful everything seemed at this hour. The birds were awake, the cattle were moving slowly, and the world felt fresh, as if offering a new beginning. Still, he struggled to stay awake, dragging his feet behind the farmer. "Hard work starts before the sun does," the farmer said. "Not because it is easy, but because discipline shapes the day before the day shapes you." When they reached the wide fields, the farmer handed him a small sack of seeds. "Today, you will work with your hands," he said gently. "If you want to understand life, understand the soil first." The young man sighed, but did as he was told. The farmer showed him how to dig small holes, place the seeds carefully, cover them with soil, and water them lightly. It all seemed simple at first, but after hours under the sun, the work became tiring. His back ached, his hands felt rough, and sweat dripped from his forehead. Yet something shifted inside him. For the first time, he felt the strange satisfaction of doing something real, something that required effort. Each seed he planted felt like a small promise to the future. He looked up occasionally at the farmer, who worked steadily beside him, without complaints, without hesitation. There was beauty in the rhythm of it all, the steady breaths, the soft thud of soil falling back to the ground, the quiet whisper of the wind across the field. "This is what honest sweat feels like," the farmer said, noticing his change in expression. "It cleans more than the body. It cleans the mind." By noon, they paused for a break under a tree. The farmer handed him a cup of cool water. The young man had never tasted anything so refreshing. The farmer looked at him thoughtfully before speaking again. "Do you know why I asked you to come today?" The young man shook his head. "Because you are walking through life without giving anything to it," the farmer said quietly. "You expect comfort without effort, respect without responsibility, and a future without sacrifice. But life doesn't work like that. He pointed to the field. "Look at the earth. It waits patiently for us to sow something, but it gives nothing to those who give nothing to it." The words struck the young man deeply. He swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. The farmer continued, "Every grain I harvest, every crop I store, every meal I put on my table, it all comes from this understanding. The earth rewards those who work, who care, who try, and it turns its back on those who do not." The young man lowered his gaze. "But what if I don't know how to start? What if I fail?" The farmer smiled, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Everyone starts somewhere. Even I was once young, foolish, and afraid of work. But the only real failure is choosing to do nothing." They returned to work, and as the young man moved across the field, he found himself thinking about his life, his choices, his habits, the people he had disappointed. Questions he had ignored for years finally rose to the surface. Why had he wasted so much time? Why had he let his mother struggle alone? Why had he acted as if life would simply carry him forward without effort? As the sun began to set, painting the fields in golden light, the young man felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Tired, dirty, and sore, he walked home with a quiet determination forming in his heart. For the first time, he wondered if he could become someone better, someone useful, someone responsible. The farmer's words echoed in his mind long after they parted ways. The earth gives nothing to those who give nothing to it. And for the first time in his life, the young man began to question the path he had been walking all along. Chapter 5. Hitting Rock Bottom. The lesson from the farmer had planted a seed in the young man's heart, but seeds take time to grow. And life, in its own way, was preparing a much harsher lesson, one he could no longer ignore or laugh away. One cold evening, as the sky darkened and the wind brushed sharply against the village, the young man returned home to find his mother slumped in her chair, breathing weakly. Her face looked pale, and the tiredness in her eyes was deeper than anything he had ever seen. She tried to smile when she saw him, but even that seemed to require effort. "I'm just a little tired," she whispered. But he knew it was more than that. Her illness didn't come suddenly. It had been creeping in for weeks, fed by years of overwork, poor rest, and the burden of doing everything alone. While he wasted days wandering or sleeping, she had carried the weight of their home, pushing her old bones and fragile body farther than they were meant to go. Now the consequences stood before him, fragile and heartbreaking. As night settled in, he checked their food storage. His heart sank. The baskets were nearly empty. Only a handful of grains and a few dried vegetables remained. Winter was approaching, and they had almost nothing prepared. The fields outside were overgrown and barren. Tools lay rusted near the fence. The house roof had a leak that he had promised to fix months ago. Everything around him spoke a truth he had ignored for too long. They were unprepared. Not because life had been cruel, but because he had been careless. That night, as he helped his mother lie down, she squeezed his hand gently and said, "I always believed you would find your way. Just don't let life pass you by." Her words broke something inside him. He sat by her bedside long after she fell asleep, staring at the dim flame of the oil lamp. The weight of regret pressed down on him like a mountain. All the moments he had wasted, all the chores he had postponed, all the responsibilities he had ignored. They rushed back to him like a flood. He realized painfully that the true cost of laziness was not measured in money or possessions. It was measured in lost time, hurt loved ones, missed chances, and the silent suffering of those who depended on him. His mother had paid the price for his idleness, and now he had to face the truth he had run from his entire life. In desperation, he stood up the next morning before sunrise, determined to do everything at once, to fix months of neglect in a single day. But life never works that way. Hardship demands steady effort, not desperation. He tried repairing the fence first, but he had no proper tools and the wooden posts were too damaged. He moved to the roof, climbing up clumsily only to crack one of the old tiles and nearly fall. He rushed back down, panicked and angry, and turned to the field, pulling weeds with trembling hands. But without strength or technique, he made little progress. Sweat soaked his clothes, his muscles burned, and his breath came in painful gasps. Still, he pushed himself harder. Neighbors passing by watched quietly. Some pitied him, others simply shook their heads. He had avoided work for so long that now the simplest tasks felt like mountains. By afternoon, he collapsed onto the ground, overwhelmed, exhausted, and shaking. He stared at the sky through tear-filled eyes, feeling the weight of years pressing down on him all at once. His mother's weak voice calling from the house pierced the silence, and he felt a sharp twist of guilt in his chest. He wanted to be strong, to fix everything, to undo all his mistakes, but he had no idea how. He stumbled back inside and sat beside her. She looked at him with worried eyes, despite her own pain. Seeing her concern broke him completely. His voice trembled as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have helped. I should have listened. I should have been better." The words came out in gasps, like they had been trapped inside him for years. Tears spilled down his cheeks, and he buried his face in his hands. For the first time in his life, he didn't try to hide his weakness. He didn't pretend everything was fine. He didn't laugh or shrug things off. He cried, deep, aching, painful cries that came from regret and the fear of losing the only person who had never given up on him. His mother placed a trembling hand on his head, stroking his hair gently. "It's not too late," she whispered. "You can still change. Just don't give up on yourself." Her words, soft and fragile, hit him harder than any punishment ever could. That night, as he sat by her bedside, he made a promise, not spoken aloud, but carved deep within his heart. He would change. He would become someone she could depend on, someone he himself could be proud of. The days ahead would be hard, maybe harder than anything he had ever faced. But for the first time in his life, he felt a determination stronger than his excuses. He had hit rock bottom, and there was only one direction left to go. Chapter 6. Awakening and Effort. The morning after his emotional breakdown, something changed in the young man. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly. It was a shift in his heart rather than his surroundings, a small awakening that whispered, "Start now." For the first time in his life, he rose before the sun, the sky still dark and the air crisp with early dawn. His body protested, stiff and tired, but he forced himself up. He knew his habits had dragged him down for years. Only new habits could lift him back up. He began with small tasks. The broken fence that had been leaning for months became his first challenge. Though he had no skill and very little confidence, he picked up the old hammer and pushed himself to try. It took hours longer than it should have. Nails bent, wood splintered, his hands blistered. But he kept going. By the time the sun climbed high, he stood in front of a fence that was no longer perfect, but it was standing, and he had built it. Next, he repaired the leaky roof, climbing carefully and fixing what he could with whatever materials were available. He fetched water, collected firewood, cleaned the yard, and began clearing the overgrown field one patch at a time. Every muscle in his body ached. His arms felt like stones, his breath short, and sweat soaked his clothes. Early failures discouraged him. Tools slipped, repairs broke, and chores took 3 times longer than they should have. More than once, he wanted to quit, to sit down and say, "It's too hard." But each time he felt that old voice return, he remembered his mother's weak smile, the farmer's steady guidance, and the shame of all the wasted years. And he pushed forward. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, very slowly, his body adapted. His hands, once soft from idleness, grew rough and firm. Calluses formed, proof of effort rather than neglect. His posture straightened as he began carrying loads of wood or lifting tools regularly. His steps lost their laziness. They became steadier, more purposeful. The tiredness still came, but it no longer defeated him. Instead, it felt like a companion walking beside him, reminding him he was working toward something meaningful. The villagers, who once shook their heads at the sight of him, began to notice the change. At first, their reactions were cautious. A few raised eyebrows, a few whispers. But as days passed, they saw him sweeping his yard at dawn, repairing tools, offering help during harvest, and greeting them with quiet respect. Slowly, their expressions softened. Some gave him small nods of acknowledgement. Others offered encouraging smiles. Even the children, who used to run past him without a second glance, stopped to watch him work with curious eyes. Respect in the countryside was earned, not given. And he was beginning to earn it. The wise old farmer, who had first shown him the value of effort, watched from a distance. He didn't praise him too much. He didn't need to. Instead, he offered short, calm pieces of advice whenever the young man struggled. "Hold the tool this way. It won't strain your back. Plant the seeds deeper. The roots will be stronger. Don't rush. Good work takes time." The young man listened carefully, soaking in the wisdom like dry soil absorbing water. He admired the farmer, not for his strength, but for his steadiness, his quiet dignity. The farmer became a silent guide, appearing at just the right moments, nudging him gently in the right direction. At home, the mother slowly grew stronger. Resting more often now, she watched her child with a mixture of disbelief and pride. She saw him return each day covered in dust, sweat, and exhaustion, but with a spark in his eyes that she had never seen before. When he brought her food, repaired the roof above her bed, or helped her sit comfortably, she felt tears gather in her tired eyes. Sometimes late at night, she would whisper softly, "You're changing." And he would smile quietly, replying only, "I'm trying." Her recovery, though gradual, strengthened his resolve. Knowing she was watching fueled his determination. He wanted her to rest, to feel safe, to trust that he could finally carry the responsibilities she had shouldered alone for years. The days remained difficult. The work remained tiring. But effort had begun to replace idleness, and purpose had begun to replace regret. Every sunrise brought a new challenge, but also a new chance, a chance he no longer ignored. The young man, once known as the idle boy, was shedding that identity bit by bit. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't strong yet. But he was becoming someone different, someone better. And though he didn't notice it himself, his heart was becoming stronger than his hands. Chapter 7. Harvest of Change. Seasons passed quietly, as they always did in the countryside. But this time, the young man felt each day differently. Where he once drifted without purpose, he now greeted the mornings with steady resolve. The field he had worked on little by little, a patch that once lay forgotten under weeds, began to show signs of promise. Tiny green leaves broke through the soil like small miracles. He watched them grow with a sense of pride he had never known. Every sunrise saw him watering, weeding, and tending to the land. The labor was continuous, sometimes tiring, but no longer discouraging. Instead, it filled him with a sense of direction, a sense that each stroke of effort was shaping his future. Slowly, the small field matured, its crops turning from tender green to a golden shade under the warm sun. When harvest time arrived, he stood before the modest but healthy crop, feeling an emotion he couldn't quite describe. There were not many bundles, certainly nothing compared to the experienced farmer's fields, but to him, they meant everything. They were his work, his commitment, his change made visible. As he cut the stalks and gathered the bundles into his arms, he felt as though he was holding the proof of a new life. Word of his transformation had spread throughout the village. People who once avoided asking him for help now began to approach his home again. A neighbor needed assistance repairing a broken wall. Another asked if he could help carry water from the well. Someone else wanted help loading carts during harvest. Every request was made with a quiet respect, not pity. And every time he nodded with a steady, reliable smile. He had become someone the village could count on. Helping others no longer felt like a burden. It felt natural, even joyful. He realized that the real reward wasn't the thanks he received, but the feeling of being useful, of knowing his presence made life easier for someone else. There was warmth in that feeling, a warmth he had never felt during his idle days. One afternoon, after helping repair a neighbor's tool shed, he sat under a tree and thought back to the person he used to be. He remembered waking late, wandering aimlessly, ignoring his mother's tired voice, and shrugging off every responsibility. He didn't feel shame now, not the sharp, heavy shame that once crushed him. Instead, he felt humility. He understood how deeply his actions had affected those around him, how many opportunities he had wasted, how much time had slipped through his fingers. But he also understood something else. It was never too late to grow. His past laziness was a part of his story, but not the end of it. Those mistakes had taught him lessons he carried forward. They reminded him of the pain he never wanted to repeat, and the person he never wanted to be again. And though he couldn't undo the past, he could choose every day to keep moving toward a better version of himself. The wise old farmer who had first shown him the dignity of work occasionally visited. He would examine the field, nod approvingly, and offer a few quiet words of guidance. One day, after looking over the golden crop, he simply said, "You've found your path. The young man bowed his head gratefully. No long speeches were needed. Both understood the journey he had traveled. At home, his mother's recovery continued. Watching her child return each evening with tired but confident steps filled her heart with a peace she hadn't felt in years. She saw him bring in the harvest, saw the villagers greet him with respect, and saw the light that now lived in his eyes. Her smile, once weak and worried, grew warm again. One early morning, as the world was still half asleep, the young man stepped outside. The horizon glowed with shades of gold and orange as the sun prepared to rise. He looked at the fields, the repaired fence, the tended crops, the ready tools, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Everything before him had been built by his own effort. He whispered softly, almost as if speaking to the earth itself. Effort is the seed. Change is the harvest. And as the sun finally broke over the hills, bathing the land in light, he stood tall, stronger, wiser, and renewed. He was no longer the idle boy the village had once pitied. He was a man shaped by hardship, guided by lessons, and strengthened by perseverance. A new life stretched before him, built not by luck or chance, but by the work of his own steady hands. The sunrise felt like a promise that this was only the beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. I hope it touched your heart and helped you learn new English words and expressions in a natural and easy way. Stories like this remind us that growth takes time, effort, and patience, and the same is true for learning English. Every time you read, listen, and practice, you are becoming stronger and more confident. If you enjoyed this story and found it helpful, I invite you to join our growing learning community here on YouTube. This channel, Read and Learn English, is made to help you improve your English step by step through simple stories, clear explanations, and relaxing listening practice. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Your support helps me create more helpful content for learners around the world. And by subscribing, you'll get new stories every week that will help you read, listen, and grow your English skills faster. Thank you again for spending your time with me today. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep believing in yourself.